Hi, it's Alex here, trying to do another of these live webinars on underwater photography. I'm going to follow a similar format to last time, just try and do it a little bit quicker, a little bit shorter. So start off with a talk, and while I'm talking, if you can comment and question away, and then we'll have a go at answering those questions in the second part. Hopefully this all works and the technology, I can make it work again. So let me get my slideshow up. Right. So I thought for today's talk, I'd talk about photographing turtles. One of the questions in this live Q&A last time, Jill McDonald from the Cayman Islands asked about ideas for turtle photography, and I thought that would be quite a good topic to talk about today. It's quite a nice general topic without being too technical. It's a little bit more about sort of fieldcraft and behaviour and that sort of thing. So, to get cracking, right, let me just get my slides running. There we go. So I think, first of all, turtles are a great subject for underwater photography. They're one of the, big animal, charismatic. There's not really sort of an equivalent animal to them on land. Obviously we have tortoises on land, but they're slow and lethargic, whereas turtles in the water are active, and therefore I think they're one of the classic underwater subjects. And the good thing is they're a reasonably common subject in a lot of places that we dive, but rare enough to be always special whenever we see them. I think when we can really nail a really special turtle shot, I think it can do really well for us. And this is a very old shot of mine, but just sort of makes the point that if you do get quality pictures of these subjects, they'll do really well for you as a photographer, whether you're competition focused, turtles always do well in contests, or whether you're publishing focused or whatever the focus of your photography, they can do really well for you. If you look at the middle one here, which was Taucan magazine in 2006, I think everyone who worked at Taucan then is probably not working there anymore. But you can see they actually moved the diver across compared to where he was originally in the picture. Anyway, a slight aside. Right. There are other reptiles, of course, that we photograph underwater. And they can be really exciting too. This is obviously a crocodile, certainly gets your attention, and marine iguana, one of the coolest things you can photograph anywhere around the world. But I don't really want to focus on those. I want to really focus on turtles today, and actually I'm going to focus on the two species we see the most, so which are green and hawksbill turtles. We'll come back to that in a few slides time. I think for me, the big technical thing that you have to remember with turtles is turtles, particularly their underside, the underside of their chin and their chest, and the underside of their flippers, their fins, is very reflective. The scales are very bright. And usually when we go in the water, we're not going in the water expecting to photograph a turtle. We just see a turtle when the opportunity comes. And for me, the thing I always keep in mind whenever I see a turtle is turn my strobes down a click or two. Because if I've been shooting reef scenery beforehand with a wide angle lens, and then suddenly I'm able to get close to a turtle, the thing that typically happens in that situation is people overexpose the turtle. So if, with your flash guns, when you're trying to work your way close to a turtle, you take a moment to click those strobes down, I think that's a really good place to start. And that's really the main technical thing I wanted to just to mention. The good thing is with turtles is as long as you don't stress them on the approach, I think you can get really, really strong images. And so for me, it's all about getting the right approach with turtles. If you chase towards them, race towards them, turtles are going to be out of there. But if you see a turtle and just slowly work your way towards them, particularly swimming parallel to them, keeping low, just slowly closing the distance without it feeling like you're swimming towards them, you can get very close to them. And then once you're in that kind of up close to them, they tend to be very relaxed around that. It's the process of you going towards them that tends to unnerve them, as opposed to actually once you're around them, they tend to be very relaxed. And so for me, I always put getting close to them as the first priority in my mind. And I'm obviously thinking about my photography, but I tend not to shoot at that point. And then once I've worked my way in close, then I'll start taking the pictures. And that's always when the best pictures come. Obviously, turtles are easier to approach when they're busy doing something else, resting on the reef, half asleep, munching away, busy worrying about their food, which in this case is full of spikes. This is a great time to close that distance down and get the chance to get in that zone and then produce those nice pictures. I think another thing that can actually pull turtles to you that works really well is that turtles love eating jellyfish. Is one of their favourite things to eat, and I think that's the reason why they love dome ports. It may also be the glinting nature. What I've found with turtles, if you want to pull them into your dome port, is obviously, this is a picture of me underwater, and you can see that I'm just super chilled out in the water, sitting there, just relaxed, trying to be as stationary as possible. I'm letting the turtle come to me. But what I like to do is I like to just angle my camera backwards slightly so that the sun catches the dome port. And that glinting of the dome port definitely, I think, makes it look more attractive to turtles. It definitely works to pull them in. Maybe it's because it makes it feel more like a jellyfish. And so it pulls them in onto the dome. And that's, so it's one of the easier shots to get with turtles is actually a turtle really interested in the dome. And particularly when they're sort of fixated by that zone, you'll get either really good eye contact like this shot with both eyes really looking down the lens, or you'll actually get the turtle opening its mouth and trying to eat the dome. If this is a shot you're going for, remember to pull your strobes in really tight for this type of image. Otherwise, when the turtle's right on the dome port, it's going to be in the shadow of the camera. So if you are going for that sort of turtle on the dome shot, remember to adjust your strobes beforehand. I think the other time it's really easy to approach turtles is by remembering that turtles need to breathe air. And the time not to approach turtles is when they need to breathe and they're going up. First of all, they've got other things on their mind, and secondly, obviously they're holding their breath, but if you're ever underwater holding your breath, the last thing you want on your way up to the surface is someone messing you around. So the key thing for me is if I see a turtle that's just lifted up off the reef and is starting to go up to breathe, I don't race and chase towards it. That's not the time to get photos. I'll let it go to the surface and I'll maintain my depth underneath it. And the reason I do this is because when turtles have been up to the surface and breathed, they nearly always dive vertically straight down. So if I see a turtle go up to the surface, I never chase up to the surface. First of all, it's very bad for your dive profile above anything else. I'll stay at the depth I am and swim directly underneath it and keep swimming often quite a lot to stay underneath it in the current and everything like that. And then when the turtles finish breathing, and they'll breathe at the surface, up, wait a bit, up again, wait a bit. And then when they're ready, they often have a look around and they tend to go straight down. And I would say 9 times out of 10, they come straight to my camera. And it's a really, really great way of doing this. Whether you're shallow or whether you're deep, they'll just come straight to the camera. And I think it's the most productive way of getting really good encounters, particularly out in the blue. Works really well with turtles. So if they're breathing on the surface, spend time getting below them. And also, because you know the direction they're going to come to, use that time to get your settings right. Get your blue exposure right. Think about, what am I going to do if the sun is in the picture? Okay, I'm going to try and get an angle so that the turtle ends up blocking the sun. Think about those things beforehand. And this is actually something that, for me, works with multiple reptile species. So if you are, this is exactly the same technique I use with this sea crate, this banded sea snake. It was up at the surface breathing. I gambled on the fact that it would dive directly vertical down after breathing, so swam out into the blue, hung underneath it. And when it left the surface, it came right into my frame with the fisheye lens. Because I knew the angle I was going to shoot from, I'd already got my exposure right for the sun and the blue and everything. And then I just used my hand in this case to get the exposure right for the flash guns. And then when it swam into the frame, I was able to get my image. So for me, if there's one lesson that I think is really important for turtle photography, is actually to be able to know how to tell the difference between the 2 main species we see when we're diving. Now, of course, if you live in the Azores or Florida or the Mediterranean, you're going to see a lot of loggerhead turtles. And if you go on a trip, like Jason Isley's been running some fantastic trips to see leatherback turtles in the last couple of years. Again, if you're doing things, or if you go to Galapagos, you see Galapagos green turtles. Of course, you're going to see other species of turtle around the world. But the 2 that most divers photograph most of the time are these 2, hawksbill and green turtles. And one of the most valuable things you can do in terms of turtle photography as an underwater photographer is to learn how to tell the difference between these 2 types of turtle, because the photographic opportunities that each of them offer are very different. And if you don't know which turtle you're looking at, you can be waiting for a particular shot or trying to create a particular shot that species isn't going to give you because it's the wrong species. And I would say that a large proportion of underwater photographers struggle to tell hawksbills and greens apart. And if you can sort that out in your head, it can really help things. Now, there's lots of individual differences that you can to do. But for me, the best way to learn to tell them apart is just to learn to recognize them. In the same way that you learn to recognize your friends. You don't say, oh yeah, that's James there because, he's got blue eyes. You say, that's James because I recognize his face. And that for me is how I would always try and recognize turtles, is learn to spot the 2 apart. So and the same way, as we do with our friends. And if you can do that, then you know what sort of pictures you can expect to try and get. So hawksbill turtle first. The hawksbill was the one on the left here. It's got a slightly more hooked mouth. It's got slightly different eye. It doesn't tend to have that tired-looking eye with the wrinkles underneath it. It's obviously got slightly different fins. It's got a slightly different carapace or shell. But don't worry about it. Just learn to recognise a hawksbill. It'll make a huge difference. And people get it wrong all the time, I have to say. One of the photographers I love following on Instagram is Paul Nicklin, and he posted photos of green turtle last week saying it was a hawksbill. So everybody makes that mistake. But if you can sort it out in your brain, you give yourself a big advantage over other photographers, because the types of shots you can get with a hawksbill are not the same as you can get with a green. Oh, someone just said there's a really bad sound issue on this video. Sorry about that. Is that better? I hope so. So for me, hawksbill turtles, they are the turtles of the reef. Both of these species of turtle we're going to encounter on coral reefs, but hawksbills live there all the time and feed there. Green turtles tend to come there to sleep and rest and that sort of thing. So, everyone's saying much better on the audio. So sorry about that. I can't hear myself going through. Cool. Right. Anyway, back to the reef. Hawksbills are reef turtles. And for me, that's, the place to shoot them. So I love taking pictures of hawksbills in amongst reef scenery. But the main shot that I'm always thinking of with hawksbill turtles, if I can see a hawksbill, is to try and get a feeding shot. Because hawksbill turtles really feed on the reef. And they feed on a variety of invertebrates, and particularly some really attractive ones. They feed on colourful sponges, colourful soft corals, and occasionally a few other things. Although they're reef turtles, we find them obviously in different tropical environments. This is on a shipwreck here, and it's just to make the point that although I say they're reef turtles, you will find them in other places, but the key thing is they feed on reef animals, and that gives you the chance to get these feeding shots, which I think are the most dramatic way to shoot them, and that's always a shot that I'm looking for. Generally, I'm most interested in shooting turtle feeding shots when the turtle is feeding on something really attractive. So give the turtle plenty of space, get used to it, and allow it to work its way down the reef feeding. And then when it gets to those positions where you've got the chance to separate it nicely from the background and it's feeding nicely on a subject, and particularly if they're swimming while feeding, they look really nice rather than hunkered down in the reef. They can look really, really photogenic. So that's something that I'm always looking for. Green turtles, we encounter them all the time on a coral reef, and this is a green turtle here right in the middle of a load of a cropper or coral. But these turtles tend not to feed on the reef. So there's no point following a green turtle waiting for it to start munching on corals and that sort of thing. But green turtles are probably slightly more photogenic than hawksbills and give different shots. Just while I'm trying to sorting that sound out, do remember, please, if anyone's got any questions and comments about for me to answer afterwards, feel free to bash some questions in, and I'll finish this session with a Q&A answering any underwater photography questions that come in. Right. Green turtles are actually herbivores, and they predominantly feed on seagrass beds that we often find very close to coral reefs. A lot of the sites where you tend to encounter green turtles when scuba diving tend to be reefs that are near to seagrass beds. So if you're diving in an area where there's no seagrass at all, you're unlikely to encounter lots of green turtles. But often on reefs where there's passageways through a main reef, they're popular areas for green turtles to hang out. Now, if you do go diving over seagrass, you get the chance to shoot them with seagrass that has green turtles feeding on it. You do get the chance to see them feeding. And particularly high tide can be a good time to look for this, because a lot of seagrasses can grow very shallow, and actually that slightly deeper water tends to bring more turtles in. And again, when they're feeding, they can make quite a lot of mess in that silty environment. But that's something I quite like to embrace in the photos. So in this type of shot, just using a tickle of flash, just to bring out a little bit of colour on the subject, but I don't want to create loads of backscatter. I don't mind all the fogginess in the picture, because that adds that adds to the atmosphere and everything like that. Unusually, this picture I put in just because this is actually a green turtle who doesn't know what he's doing. So this is a large female green turtle, and she's actually eating this lithothiton. It's not lithothiton. It's I can't remember the name of the soft coral. Sarcophyton maybe. No, lithothiton. Anyway, doesn't matter. It's eating this soft coral growing on the reef. And so it's obviously not read the manual about how to be a green turtle. So occasionally, of course, you will get these variations. And the one thing that both turtles will always do is if there's particularly if there's abundant jellyfish, they'll really want to feed on those. But the go-to shot with green turtles, particularly younger green turtles, is to capture their shell patterns. And this is a shot made famous by an old British photographer called Malcolm Hay, who had a photo of a back of a green turtle in one of the old Wildlife Photographer of the Year collections as a winning image there. And that picture was really used as a press image from the competition, so it was seen absolutely everywhere. And that really popularized this top-down view of a green turtle. And this shot works on a green turtle because the shell is really, really attractive on green turtles, particularly young green turtles. They have very, very attractive markings. And we can do lots of variations of this shot. But if you do get a green turtle and you know it's a green turtle, that's the time just to drift up above it and get the chance to shoot down on the shell. These are just some variations here. It looks really great in black and white. It also looks really nice. I've just tried a variation with a long exposure. The other thing that I think is important when doing this shot is if you've got a zoom lens, zoom it in a little bit. You don't want to shoot this with too wide a lens. If you do this back of the shell, looking down on them type shots with green turtles, what you end up with is that the shell of the turtle looks really, really huge and the flippers look really tiny around the edges. So actually, particularly if you've got a zoom lens, just zoom it in a little bit and that will allow you to get a slightly more correctly proportioned turtle with these top-down shots. Green turtles also have really nice faces, I think. And because they're they feed on seagrass, you do bump into them every now and again when doing muck dives in around that environment. And that can be a really nice opportunity to shoot their faces. You might also bump into them sleeping on the reef, where they tend to go to rest. And again, that can be a good chance to get these face shots. They've got, I think, a really more characterful and interesting face than a hawksbill turtle. Both species of turtles are, just to finish off, are great for silhouette shots. And also, and I think that works well. Again, this is a good shot to do when they've been up breathing on the surface. And you know that they're going to, following that advice I was giving earlier, you know that they're going to come right back down straight past you. It's really easy to set up for a silhouette shot. And you can get lots of shots off really, really, really quickly when doing this. The final thing I would say about turtles is turtles do suffer with a number of things around the world. They struggle a lot with bycatch. They also suffer with ghost fishing. Getting tangled in nets, and they're captured and eaten as well, or on the case of the other photo here, kept in aquariums. And I think it's nice to as underwater photographers to remember that we want to obviously celebrate the wonders of the ocean, but at the same time, when we see animals struggling, when we see issues, conservation issues that we want to highlight, we should challenge ourselves to produce powerful images of these so that we can highlight those issues. The turtle that's caught in the net, we released it. Actually, it's not a particularly good photo because we were more concerned with releasing it than taking a nice photo. This was just a quick snap before we got it out of there. Okay, I think that was my last slide. So sorry about the audio issues at the beginning, but I shall try now to return to me being full screen, and I'm going to see if I've got any questions coming in to answer. Right, there's one. Thanks for all the questions. There's one here from Jenny. The best model position with turtles. Now, turtles are really good to work with when shooting with the model, because once you've got a cooperative turtle that you haven't spooked on the way in, as a photographer, you can then spend some time working with them. Generally, because if the turtle's nice and relaxed, you can make those pictures happen. You've got lots of flexibility. So as a model, when you're far away, it's best obviously to pose as a silhouette. Generally, turtle pictures are going to be horizontal pictures, and there's a few exceptions I've shown in the talk, but generally because of the shape of the animal. So you want to be in that sort of, in the distance, but relatively low over the turtle, not way up in the water column to work as a background model. But I quite like getting a face in there. I think the encounter between a turtle and a person is a really special thing. So I quite like encouraging, when I'm working with a model with a turtle, encouraging the model to come in nice and close to the turtle as well, because I think that shows it shows one of the most amazing things as a diver, which is to have that encounter with a wild animal, particularly that with a turtle. So I prefer shots with turtles where the model comes in nice and close and then is concentrating on getting that face and eye line right. So often they'll obviously be positioning themselves with the turtle between themselves and the photographer, but making sure that their head and face is clearly visible to the camera and that they're facing towards the camera but looking at the turtle. And that'll make the picture work well. Right. Next question by Rui. Where do you put the strobe? So if you take a photo vertically upwards in shallow water, you'll generally always get flare from the strobes on the surface. If there's a slight angle to that picture, you won't get the flare from the surface. So if you are shooting directly up and you want to light the subject that's between you and the surface, you're going to get some flare on the surface. Obviously, if you're deeper, that's not really an issue, but when you're in very shallow water, as soon as you start to have some sort of angle, that amount of flare drops way down, because the light, instead of bouncing straight at the surface and straight back to the camera, is then hitting the surface and bouncing away from the camera. So if you really have to avoid it, do that. But generally, I'd say that's not something I'm thinking about when I'm with a turtle. Usually I'm relatively deep when they're coming down from the surface, because I've not raced up to the surface with them. But if they are coming straight down and I'm very shallow, I'm not really going to worry about it. It's not ideal to have those. If you've got two flashes, it's sort of two white blobs on either side of the picture. But generally they're quite small. And if you really, you can always get rid of them in Photoshop if it's really a big issue to you. But for me, not too worried about them. Right. Any tips for shooting a marine iguana? Well, first of all, obviously, the marine iguana is endemic to the Galapagos Islands, and it's particularly on the western islands of the archipelago that you have the chance to go in the water with them. The water is colder in that area. It's where the majority of the upwelling is in Galapagos, and that cold water is ideal for the algae growth that the marine iguanas feed on, and the marine iguanas get really big in that area. Timing the trips can be really good for that. Quite a lot of the marine iguanas take on strong colours in the mating season, and so trips towards the end of the year can often get those really nice colours. I think it's Fernandina Island where they call the iguanas Christmas iguanas, because they go really red and really green during that season. Although underwater, I have to say, those colours don't come through quite so much. The main shots that I want to get with a marine iguana are two are in my head. One is the marine iguana down on the seabed, busy feeding. And you want that picture to feel really underwater. So the shot I showed earlier in this talk was a marine iguana on its own. I think things that I would love that would improve that shot. Maybe I can bring it back up again actually quite easily if I just swing back to my slideshow. Let me just bring my slideshow back up and zap my way back to the beginning. So the things that I would want to improve in this particular shot, where's he gone? Is it past him? Is first of all, there's no tail from the iguana. And I think that's a really big missing visual element. So I'd love the tail to be whipping around. And then also I'd love something in the background. Obviously this picture looks underwater, but if there were a few fish and things in the frame, I think the picture would be more interesting. It would seem even more unusual to see this lizard underwater, and the fish would help communicate that. So a nice feeding shot is really nice. Often when the head is right down though, you lose that connection with the eye. And this is a shot when the iguana actually lifted its head up and was chewing. And that's why its mouth is slightly open. And I like this frame because that slightly open mouth as it's chewing gives, I think, a little bit of character, a little bit of personality. It looks like he's smiling. That's why I like this shot, even though it hasn't got a tail or any fish in the background. The other shot that I really like with marine iguanas is to shoot them silhouetted on the surface. They look great silhouetted on the surface. I'm really going to test my technology now. And let me just see if I can make this work. Iguana. And that should bring up some iguana shots. So I really like shots. I don't know if this is coming through that well, but I really like iguana shots like this, where just a simple shot showing the iguana clearly in the ocean. I think it's a really cool shot. I love their sort of where they spread out in the water like this. So those are the two shots that I really like with iguanas, is one down feeding, and then particularly with a good feeling of being underwater around it with sunbeams, fish, and that sort of thing. And then the other shot I really like is the one where you've got them as a silhouette. Right. I think that's me back on screen. Right, let me get back to this. Right, I'm got to wind this up fairly soon. So, right, Dave's got a good technical one. Using 3D tracking, what focus point did you set? I tried this in the workshop, it didn't work for me. So I use 3D tracking. So this is a Nikon SLR question to do with a Nikon SLR focus mode, which is called 3D tracking. And I like to shoot a lot of moving fish macro using the 3D tracking mode. 3D tracking is a mode where you select a single point within the autofocus sensor, and when that point has locked onto the subject, it will continue to track that subject around the frame. And we can use it in two ways as underwater photographers. One is to use it just like that, is to focus on your subject, and then hopefully the camera will be able to follow it as it moves around the frame. But secondly, you can use it as well as a quick recompose tool. So you can focus on your subject, and then actually what you can do is you can then rotate your camera around, and the autofocus point will stay on the eye of the subject and move across the frame and allow you to very quickly take a shot. So I quite often use that mode. So I use it on the center point to begin with. When I arrive on a subject, focus on the eye, recompose to move that eye off center, and then the autofocus will keep tracking that eye as I slowly recompose my frame, and then I'll take my shot. And then when I've got one shot in the bag, I'll then move that autofocus point to the position where I want it in the camera. But if my subject spooked at that point, I would have at least got one shot with it sharp. So generally I start with it on the center point and then move it when I've got time to move it. And it's good then because it can allow you then to make small changes, but you're starting in the same place. If you keep leaving it in the center, each time you focus on your subject and then recompose, you have to wait for it to track across each time, which it does pretty quickly. Right. One from Grant. Do you have a quick go-to setting when shooting up towards the surface with the sun behind the turtle? So the thing to remember when setting up this shot is, I was saying before that with the turtles, whenever I see one go up to breathe, I see that as a fantastic opportunity to get a really good picture. And the way I solve that problem, and the way I set that shot up, is I'll swim directly underneath the turtle as it's on the surface, but I'll stay at the depth I am. So I'm often at even 10, 15 meters below the turtle, but I'll often have to swim quite a lot to stay exactly underneath it. And then when it comes back down to me, it will come straight from the surface. Now I've got lots and lots of time to get that shot right, but typically with the settings, I'm going to wind the shutter speed up because shooting straight up, it's likely to be brighter than the horizontal shot I was taking before. So I'll take my shutter speed up to my synchronization speed in my camera, which is 250th or 320th on my cameras, depending on what I'm shooting. And I may knock the aperture closed a couple of bits or knock the ISO down a couple of bits. But if I do that, I need to remember just to reset my strobe powers just to make sure I'm getting the right amount of strobe. Now, turtles are nice and reflective, and I often find that just using my hand in front of the camera as I'm waiting for the turtle is a really good way. I've got light colored hands, really good way of getting that exposure right beforehand. So that's kind of the way I set up those shots. If the sun is going to be in the frame, I'll often want the turtle to be blocking that sun. So I won't worry about the very middle of the sunburst overexposing too much, because in the end the turtle's going to be in front of that bit. And if I underexpose too much so that that sunburst is really well exposed, when the turtle blocks it, you almost won't get any sort of sunbeams coming around the turtle. So you don't want to underexpose too much when setting it up. You want to keep that sun nice and bright and then rely on the turtle to block it out. Right, lots of hellos and that sort of thing. I'll run through those. Hey Todd, nice to see you. Thanks for the message, Paul. I'm just going to run through, see if there's any more questions. Otherwise, it's getting close to nursery time. Anyway, thank you all. Thanks, Ellen, for tuning in for a sec. Thank you, Ner, for joining us. Let's see. Oh, there's a couple more comments. I'm sorry about the sound earlier. I'm just going back down through the things. There was a really bad echo at the beginning of the video. So really thank you for Francesco for telling me that. I really appreciate it. It was good to sort that out. Right. Okay. That's me done. I shall do my best to get my technology better next time. But thanks very much for watching. Chitty bye.